Welcome to Farms and Frontlines, everybody. I'm your host, Max Terzano, and with me, as always, is Jessica Rudo.
Hey there, everybody.
We have a very special spooky season episode planned for today. Jess, you had the idea for this, which is, I think, a super smart and timely idea, to talk about
Yes.
everybody's favorite seasonal spice, pumpkin spice.
I am a white woman, so some stereotypes are accurate. Yes, pumpkin
Well,
spice. I love it.
If you were to see my Dunkin' Donuts orders, I too would be a white woman.
I love it. I don't know why I get so much hate, but I love
I don't know.
pumpkin
It's
spice.
delicious. I love it, but it's not one spice. It's you don't just open up a pumpkin and you're like, aha, I gotcha.
Got you, spices.
Hooray, I did it.
You have been harvested.
It's a mixture, a bunch of very historically sought after spices, right?
That's right. Yeah, cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, cloves, and sometimes you'll see allspice in the mix. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But you're right. The history of these spices individually are bloody.
Which I guess should not come as a shock on this show. Cinnamon, I know, is, one of like the oldest spices in recorded history, I think, which goes all the way back to the Egyptians and their embalmings and all of that kind of stuff. But in this episode, we're just going to dive into the history of these spices individually and talk a little bit about that and any conflict that arose out of that. Because as you might imagine, a coveted spice, surely there's some conflict and chaos revolving around that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a period of time where spices are really currency. They're super, super sought after. There's only certain places in the world where these things grow. The spice trade is spicy. The spice trade is, one of the biggest factors that cause conflict. The ability to have the monopoly on these spices is what everybody in Europe basically is going after. And cinnamon is, like you said, one of the oldest ones. It's one of the most coveted in human history. It's native to Sri Lanka. And before it's called Sri Lanka, it's called Ceylon. Ceylon. Ceylon?
That's a fun little history tidbit.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then there's other parts in like Southeast Asia where cinnamon grows. But like you said, Egyptians use it as part of their embalming rituals. A lot of religious rituals use cinnamon. And then you see a lot in...
I just want to say,
What?
interjecting really quick, I guess it's smart to use it for their embalming rituals, because like you shove cinnamon up someone's nose, you're going to know if they're dead or not.
I guess so.
Oh, the pharaoh's sneezing. Cut it out. Cut it out.
That's why... Did we talk about this? That's where Saved by the Bell comes from.
No.
Because when people were burying other people, sometimes they like messed up and they weren't dead.
Oh, right. And they had like a string to a bell or something.
They would string. They'd like have a string attached to a bell, and then if somebody like woke up in a coffin, they'd like pull the string so the bell would ring.
Not again.
And then people would literally be like saved by the bell because somebody would come and like dig them up. Imagine like somebody like time traveling, and we're like, "Oh, Saved by the Bell." They're like, "What?
What?
You too?"
Worst day of my life.
I know, right?
Anyway.
So yeah, we got mentions of cinnamon in the Bible. It's given, a lot of credit for medicinal properties. People like how it smells, the aroma of it, and then how it could preserve food way back when. So cinnamon becomes a key commodity in the spice trade, and there's a lot of documents indicating that cinnamon was probably the first to be traded, especially during the Middle Ages, and it's moved from Arab caravans and merchants moving it into Europe. It was super expensive. It's the same rate as gold at this point in time.
Wow.
The Middle Ages, cinnamon is the same rate as gold and ivory. So only the super wealthy in Europe were able to have it.
Wow.
And Indonesian rafts transported cinnamon and what was called the cinnamon route into East Africa, where local traders carried it into Rome and Roman markets, obviously via the Mediterranean. But yeah, there's an entire history of like how it gets traded and those trade routes. And it's really interesting, but it's also very detailed and
right.
could probably be a smidge mundane.
Right.
Yeah. So by the 16th century, so the 1500s, Portuguese explorers reached Sri Lanka, and they quickly established a monopoly over the cinnamon trade. They set up a fort in 1518, and the Portuguese used local political strife to exploit what was going on in that area to achieve that monopoly. They work with the Kingdom of Candy, Kandy, which is also ironic for Halloween time.
That is very funny.
Yeah. There's 3 kingdoms. The Portuguese are pretty ruthless. They've got really, really tough standards, and they treat the locals like absolute garbage and the land.
Right.
It's so much so that one of those kingdoms, the Kingdom of Candy, asks the Dutch East India Company for help in pushing out the Portuguese. Now, unbeknownst to Sri Lanka and the people that live in that area, the Dutch East India Company is the villain of our story because they are D-bags. I don't know how to say that better.
Yeah,
They
I mean,
are,
if you know
yeah.
history at all, as soon as you
Mhm.
hear East India Trading Company, you're like, oh no.
Yeah, the Dutch were, of course, like excited to get into this. They end up starting the cinnamon wars. They destroy all of the cinnamon trees in India to preserve the high price of the spice and have that
Wow.
monopoly. And then the British, who controlled cinnamon production during this colonial expansion, get in on the cinnamon wars. The competition is really fierce. There's tens of thousands of people that die in these wars, symbolizing the economic and political power that European nations were trying to get through controlling these spices, which is just so
Wow.
crazy, isn't it?
It
People are going to
absolutely is.
war for cinnamon, and here we're like,
Cinnamon.
put it on top of my latte. You know what I mean? Isn't that
Yeah,
crazy?
exactly. Yeah. Can I have a little extra of that?
Yeah. So there's a story where the Dutch East India Company manufactured a shortage of cinnamon to again control the price by burning a large amount in Amsterdam in 1760s.
Can you imagine the smell?
Oh, ooh,
Like
lovely.
factory, right? Like from factories of cinnamon just being burned down. You're just like, oh, delightful.
Oh, must be fall.
Right? Could really go for
Seasons
a
are
pumpkin
changing.
spice latte.
I wonder if we could just put this in a drink and froth the milk, and that would just be lovely. That would just be lovely with this.
I think you're onto
Can you
something.
imagine? Yeah.
We'll call it Starbucks.
So that's kind of the gist of cinnamon. And modern production today, cinnamon is produced primarily still in Sri Lanka, but we also see it in Indonesia, China, and Vietnam.
Obviously, it's such a, we're such a global market that you can get it literally anywhere and you don't have to start any wars.
Sure. Yeah.
Pretty cool. I mean, that's actually super interesting. I would be curious, just as someone who's interested in like food history.
Hmm.
There are so many wars that are like the cinnamon wars, the banana
Yep.
wars. Like, what foods don't have a war or
Hmm.
wars associated with them? There's just
Yeah.
so many, and it's just insane. I mean, I'm willing to bet most of these places have some sort of tie to the Dutch East India Trading Company.
Yeah. Yeah. The Dutch, you will find very quickly that there is a pattern here, and the Dutch East India Trading Company are not nice. They're not, they are Are brutal. Another one, the Dutch East India Company. So sometimes associated with that Dutch East India Company, you'll see the letters VOC, which is how they hyphenated in Dutch their trading company. So
Okay,
if you ever
I was
see
wondering what
if you
that
ever
meant.
see VOC, yeah, it's the Dutch East India Company.
Hmm.
So nutmeg is another one that they're involved in.
Okay,
Nutmeg is a seed. I learned a lot about nutmeg when I went to Grenada in
that was recently.
March. When did I go? Geez, March. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
pretty cool.
Okay.
Because a huge export out of Grenada is nutmeg, but
Oh, okay.
it wasn't always. So it's not native to Grenada. It is native again to Southeast Asia region. So it's out of the Banda Islands in Indonesia,
Hmm.
and it became known as the Spice Islands. So if you ever see the Spice Islands, it's this area of Indonesia called the Banda Islands.
Okay.
Another luxury spice in Europe during the Middle Ages, and it was again sought after for medicinal purposes, preserving meat. And one of the things during the Middle Ages, when the Black Plague was running rampant, doctors
Hmm.
thought that nutmeg was actually able to stop the disease. Women would put nutmeg in satchels around their necks, and men would actually like mix it in with their snuff and then inhale it,
Oh my goodness.
which I'm sure
It
did
felt real
something.
good. Yeah, I
Sure,
sure
those.
did something. Wasn't nutmeg one of the spices that plague doctors with those weird bird masks, those
Yep,
plague masks? They would like stuff it in there. So they were
and
like
yeah.
just inhaling that rather than all the,
Hmm.
you know, black
I think it
plague.
was nutmeg, frankincense, might have been cinnamon too. They would stick in that beak, the beak thing for the doctors.
Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah. But I think too, like, right, if this is like a super expensive thing, who actually would have had it? It would have been right the doctors of the world, the rich. It's not going to
Right.
be. the peasants, right? They're not going to have access to this. So,
well, yeah, I mean, when you say like they mixed it
yeah.
with their snuff, it's not like the peasants were
Yeah.
walking around like.
True. True. So it's in demand. It's very rare, only found in one spot. And it's controlled by the Dutch and the Dutch East India Company in the early 1600s, kind of moving forward.
Okay.
So 10 pounds of nutmeg would have sold for 1 penny at Banda Islands. The
Mhm.
Dutch turn around and sell it for 68,000 times the original
Oh my.
cost in London.
Oof,
That markup was no joke.
not at all.
Yeah, so you can imagine, to the Dutch, this is a super important commodity, and they are going to fight for it. So they have almost all of the islands that have nutmeg, but they go about making sure that the people on Banda Island are not going to try to smuggle it out or anything. So they actually the Dutch East India Company execute all males over the age of 15.
Oh my
They
god.
behead the village leaders. They put them on pikes to discourage any rebellions. And it's so bad that they actually take that Bandanese population from 15,000 to 600. So it's basically a genocide. It's a
That's a genocide. 100%.
genocide in order to control nutmeg. Today, of course,
15,000
we're
to
like,
600
yeah, isn't that crazy?
just for nutmeg. Like,
For nutmeg. That's how important this
wild.
spice was. Yep. So there's one part of Banda Islands that somebody else owns, and that island is called Run, R-U-N, and it's owned by the British. The Dutch attacked this outpost, resulting in the Banda War, which they didn't call it the Nutmeg War, so maybe we lose an opportunity there.
Ah,
But I know the
I'm
Banda
sure
War,
somebody called it that.
yeah, it takes the Dutch 4 years to win it. They win it eventually, but it takes a while. Which, if you think of, war is costly and on several planes,
Right.
lives, money, time, right, resources.
Mhm.
So after the British lost, they continued to press for their claim to Run Island through 2 additional wars, the Anglo-Dutch Wars, basically called the Spice Wars.
There
And
we
then
go.
finally, yeah, there it is. In 1667, both sides agreed to the Treaty of Breda, Breda, almost bread, but they screwed the 2
Mhm.
letters up. Breda. The Dutch were so intent on holding that nutmeg monopoly that they offered to trade Britain one island for another. For the island of Run, the Dutch trade with them an island that was already illegally occupied by the British. They didn't see any financial gain to this island, and it's the island of Manhattan. And
No
that's when,
way.
yep, yep, the island of Manhattan. That's when the name changes from New Amsterdam to New York,
Oh wow, that's
and
so
that's
interesting. That is so
and then
interesting.
tied to nutmeg and the spice.
That's
So
wild. So
yeah.
I mean, the British would have gotten New York anyway, I feel, but it's wild to know that they traded New
Hmm.
Amsterdam, aka New York, for the island of Run
So
and the
they had a
Treaty of
complete
Breda.
hope was to have a complete monopoly over nutmeg. But the British smuggled nutmeg out. A lot of accounts show that the British smuggled nutmeg to other British territories. But there's
That
also
makes
accounts that
sense.
there was a Frenchman that smuggled nutmeg seeds out. His name was Pierre Poivre, which is basically Peter Pepper. He smuggled
uh,
nutmeg seedlings to Mauritius. Is that how you say it?
Mauritius, yeah, I think that's how you
Yeah,
say it.
Mauritius, right?
That's one of the
So
words that I
he's
like. I see it written down, and I just like
mhm.
my mind blanks out. I'm just like, yep,
Yeah, my mouth wants to say Boratia, but I know
yeah,
that is not right.
Mauritius, yeah,
I know that's not right.
right.
He smuggles a nutmeg seedling to Mauritius and then other French colonies, which is how Grenada gets nutmeg. So either way, the
Wow.
Dutch lost out on that monopoly. So they lose out on the monopoly on the nutmeg. They lose New Amsterdam, aka New York. But I mean,
Yeah,
they're
so
jerks, so they deserve it.
yeah,
It's
they
karma.
really are jerks. Like you can't overstate how much the East India Company like just sucked
Yeah, I mean, a genocide over
for
nutmeg.
nutmeg.
Yeah,
Ugh,
but yeah, it's crazy.
it
Um,
really is.
Today, modern day, like I said, nutmeg is kind of grown in various regions, Grenada, the Caribbean, and also still in Asia, Southeast Asia, more specifically. But yeah, that's nutmeg. Isn't that crazy?
I mean, it really is crazy because already we
I know.
have the cinnamon wars, we have the spice wars,
Hmm.
and this is just
Multiple spice wars. I
multiple
think,
spice wars. Yeah,
yeah.
we have a genocide all for nutmeg.
And that's only
Cinnamon.
two
I
out of the
mean,
spices out of pumpkin spice.
I'm curious to see because I mean, you sent me this wonderful outline that we're reading off of and going out. But I'm very curious to see how the rest plays out.
So ginger is not as no like giant war over ginger, but ginger is the next one that we got to. And it has also been cultivated for thousands of years. Again, another Southeast Asia spice. And it was domesticated in China and India. And it's mentioned in several ancient texts. Even Confucius talks about ginger in his writings. The Romans imported ginger from India via Arab traders. And you know what I think also, when we think about certain time periods like the Middle Ages, we forget how influential like the Arab world was on
Oh,
Europe.
absolutely. Yeah.
And maybe it's because of how we learn things or how historically we have been taught here in the
Right.
United States, how we
Mhm.
focus on certain histories. But yeah, again, just to highlight, the Arab traders are super important in getting these spices into Europe.
I mean, back in
And,
like, in antiquity and the Middle Ages, Arab traders were really like the liaisons between the European world and Southeast Asia and like the rest of Asia.
yeah, if you look at like old maps of the Mediterranean, it's really fascinating because they associate people with things like spices or foods or tradable goods. And that's kind of how they mapped the Mediterranean. Like, all right, where are we going? Oh, we're going to the spice place. All right, cool. And this is who we're going to meet, these kind of people. And it was kind of,
Right.
it's really neat. I want to say it's like a 1300s map. I think it's neat.
I think that's pretty cool.
Anyway, so during the medieval period, ginger was one of the most commonly traded spices in Europe. It's found to have several medicinal properties. Even today, ginger has a ton of medicinal properties, or sought after for medicinal reasons. One was to help with digestion, illnesses, just preventing illnesses in general. And then it made it pretty popular amongst the wealthy. As European powers continued to colonize the New World, ginger was brought into the Caribbean where it thrived because of its tropical climate. And then again, it's an export commodity for the Europeans. That's kind of the gist of ginger's history. I couldn't find a ginger war that didn't take me to like, something about Ireland.
That's terrible. Okay, but which is kind of interesting, like where you say ginger was brought to the Caribbean.
Yeah.
When we were studying about Haiti, I saw farmers in the mountains of Haiti would farm ginger.
Yeah. And they chew on it. Ugh,
Yeah.
which I can't imagine.
Sounds
Again,
awful.
another thing that opens your sinuses up.
Yeah.
But yeah, ginger's all over the place. Grown Jamaica, Haiti, India, China. It's all over the world now.
Wow.
I know. That one's
Super
kind of
interesting.
the palate cleanser.
Right.
But I think our next one takes us back into fighting. Yep, it
Okay.
does. Cloves.
Yep.
Cloves are the dried flower buds of a tree that is in Indonesia. It's off of the Maluku Islands. They have been used for, again, thousands of years in China and India and the Middle East for their aromatic and medicinal properties. In China, they were used early in the Han Dynasty to like help your breath, like breath mint.
I guess that makes sense.
And
They
then
didn't exactly have toothpaste and quality
true.
dental hygiene.
I'm gonna just chew on this clove. It'll be fine.
Tune in next episode for the history of toothpaste.
I bet that is pretty interesting. But anyway,
Right.
cloves were, again, highly valued, right?
Okay.
Medieval Europe traded across the Indian Ocean through Arab traders again. And Europeans began exploring east. The Portuguese were the first to control the clove trade as well. They set up a trading colony in Ternate in 1522. So it's pretty early
Where
on.
in the world is Ternate?
How dare you call me out? Call me out on my incomplete outline.
I'm just like, I've never heard of that.
It's an island in Indonesia.
Okay.
So it's close to those Spice Islands. And it's close to these Maluku Islands that have clove on them.
Isn't that crazy though? How like the Portuguese or whoever just shows up and then is like, what's this?
What
I
this?
see.
Yeah.
We're going to trade it around the world now.
It is mine now. Yeah.
Yeah. I made this?
I know. Yes, I did. The cloves were already known, right? Like I was saying, the Arabs are trading cloves, but the Portuguese are hoping to like take control of that trade.
Right.
And and I taught Latin American history. Like the Portuguese have been exploring, and they are very good at sailing boats.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're like all over the world at this point.
They are
like
all
very
over the
early
world.
on.
They're one of the first. Yes. Yeah, they're going to be one of the first in a lot of spots because there's certain treaties where they can't go east and try to discover land because the importance of holding land is, it's equates to wealth and power. So they have to
And
go west and they have to explore. Yeah.
right. And the Pope told them they couldn't do that
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah. Exactly. No, the Pope said you can't go east, so go
Yeah.
west, and then whatever you find in certain areas is yours. And they're like, "All right, cool,"
And that's
and
why
off they
like
went.
Brazil is the only Portuguese speaking country
Hmm.
down in South America, right? Because
Yeah,
of
that's
that
right.
treaty.
Yep, that treaty is gonna. Nobody knows exactly where that treaty did, but it's kind of like roughly half through where like current day Brazil is.
Right.
Yeah, but
Right.
yeah, you're right. So anywho, they're all over the place. They are the world travelers, and they hold the clove trade, the monopoly for a little bit. Guess who they lose it to? They
I'm
lose
gonna
it to
go
the
out on a
Dutch.
limb. Yep.
They lose it to the Dutch East India Company.
My goodness.
Yep, the Portuguese wanted to control like all of the clove trade, but they get into certain conflicts with the natives that were on the island. And those Ternatians, they team up with the Dutch East India Company and they fight the Portuguese. And
I'm gonna go out
shock,
on a limb again and say that doesn't work out very well for the Ternatians.
you are correct.
Hmm.
And the Dutch enforced harsh policies to control that monopoly. They uprooted and burned clove trees that were not inside of their like zone that they owned. And the Dutch East India companies would send soldiers and laborers to different islands to carry out that policy. They would beat
My
those
goodness.
people, like anybody working on those farms, they would harass and torment basically.
Yeah,
Um,
and I mean this is
but
the same people that brought the islands that we just talked about with
nutmeg, yeah.
15,000 people to 600. So you can imagine
Yep.
they're not above slaughtering people.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So that's how important these spices are, is that they're willing to just obliterate local populations. But they couldn't help, the Dutch East India Company, no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't keep that monopoly. And I guess the rest of the world can thank birds.
Ah,
Birds end up, yep, they would spread cloves to new areas. They liked cloves and the flowers, and they kind of picked it up and pooped them out somewhere else. And
so
eventually
they just
people would,
basically pollinated. They just grabbed it and were like, bye.
yeah, this is mine now.
Yeah, I'm gonna go give this
Yep.
to Mauritius.
Yeah. Birds move them, and eventually people start bringing seeds to different parts of the world and kind of concentrate in East Africa, Zanzibar, Mauritius area.
Hmm,
Cloves were used in traditional medicine, antiseptic properties, and almost as a digestive aid. And in certain cultures, cloves were used in religious rituals. They were used to ward off evil spirits, which again is kind of interesting with this like Halloween type theme. There are even reports that indigenous men would use cloves during warring season, thinking that it made them invisible,
huh.
which I don't get, but whatever.
But I do think it's
Um,
very interesting.
yeah.
If we've learned anything from this episode, it's that pumpkin spice lattes are very good for your health.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right.
All of these spices have been used for medicinal purposes throughout history. So I don't know. Maybe they're onto something.
Yeah.
And
I
they ward
feel
off evil
justified.
spirits. So,
Yeah, it
you
works for
know.
me at work. Yeah, I might be the evil spirit, and they're it's warding every. That'd be funny. That would be awesome, but no.
But no. One more, right?
This one is sometimes in and sometimes not, but allspice, which is not a clever name.
Right.
I guess it is a clever name because it's just a. So I always thought allspice was literally all the spices, like basically
Right.
pumpkin spice, but like its own separate spice. Allspice is actually native to the Caribbean and Central America area, and it was used by indigenous personnel like the Tanos long before Europeans arrived. And there's documents to support that.
And the
I think it's
Tanos
like
we
a lot
talked
of.
about as living
Mhm.
on Hispaniola, right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay.
When the Spanish conquistadors came in and found it, they named the spice allspice because they said the flavor of it was reminiscent of all of things together: cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg. The Spanish
Interesting.
invaders initially thought it was a pepper, so they called it Jamaican pepper, which, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's all right. So, following Europeans coming into Latin America, basically, allspice became a valuable export. It was used to flavor food, which I do find interesting because European palates are very bland.
Hmm. I mean, there's
I'm
always jokes
surprised.
about the
Mhm.
Europeans like conquering the world in search of spices, having the blandest
Yeah,
food.
I think we talked about Chef Boyardee and how like Italians had to like make Italian or more bland because it was too spicy. And
Yeah.
that's like tomatoes.
Right. These spicy, spicy tomatoes.
Yeah. Anywho, so they'd use allspice to flavor food, but also preserve meats, especially when, before refrigeration. So modern use, allspice is primarily grown in Jamaica, In other parts of the Caribbean, it's a key ingredient in Caribbean cuisine, which makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Not in European cuisine in
Right.
the, conquering times.
Hmm.
But it also finds its way into Western baking, including, right, these pumpkin spice blends.
Right. Okay.
That's
I can see
allspice.
that.
Yeah.
I can also see why it would be optional. I guess it's kind of just like if you want
Overkill. Yeah.
more of it, you know?
Yeah. 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 I guess it's just
That's
to
just
enhance.
so this one, allspice seems to be, I want to say, like, there's not like an allspice war or something like that, but we have talked about
Yes.
just the brutality with the conquistadors and then the French in Hispaniola and just how all that went.
I just think it's important to point out, we're talking about, I think, we take a lot of things for granted, like spices, and the history
Right.
behind them is just, it changed how the world was, or how the world is
Yeah.
today. Like the
For
Silk
something as
Roads,
small as
maritime
nutmeg,
routes. Yeah.
like
It really
it's just
connected
not,
the
it's
world,
not
though. Yeah.
things, yeah. It's not something that you
Mhm.
typically think about when you're going through the Starbucks drive-through line or
But now you can.
something.
Now you
Yeah,
can
if
think
you
about
really
it
want to
every time.
start your day off right.
You're like, I am grateful that I don't have to kill somebody for these spices.
Right, you can just go to the drive-through. So we talked about all of the spices individually, but how did
Mhm.
quote unquote pumpkin spice come to be a thing?
So these spices all came to become staples in Western cooking as early as 1795. It's really interesting, actually, the history you can get out of like cookbooks. But there's a cookbook written in 1795 by somebody, I don't know her first name, it's just listed as Mrs. Fraser.
Hmm.
And the cookbook is called The Practice of Cookery. And she refers to a blend of mixed spices, which is composed of Jamaican pepper, nutmeg, and clove. Although these spices were also used with ginger and mace throughout the book. In pickling recipes, which sounds gross.
So you'd have like pumpkin spice onions.
Yeah. Or like pumpkin
That's
spice,
fish.
I don't even know. Corn? Like what else are they pickling?
Pumpkin spice pickled eggs. If you want a nice Halloween
Ugh.
treat.
So yes. Oh my gosh, listen to what we just did. Like not every so like everybody, you hear the complaint like everything has pumpkin spice in it. It's ridiculous. It's
Yeah,
not ridiculous. It's not new. Pumpkin
right.
spice everything has been the norm since 1795.
Yeah, exactly. They just didn't have the internet and
Man,
advertising.
man, that's right.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah,
It really
pumpkin
truly
spice
is.
everything for hundreds of years,
I
and it's
mean, yeah,
still
when I first saw this, when I first saw your notes, I thought that said 1975, not
no 1795.
1795.
Yep,
That's wild.
yep. So there's another at the same time. So it's not just one lady doing this. Amelia Simmons used the combination of sugar, mace, nutmeg, and ginger to season her pumpkin pie recipe. And that's the earliest example of the spice blend in the United States.
Wow.
So finally, I'm sorry, the recipes in American Cookery, another cookbook.
I like how they keep calling it cookery back then.
Yeah, yeah. So it's first referenced as pumpkin spice in the 1950s.
Okay.
And McCormick actually made the blend pumpkin pie spice, 1950s, and shortened to just pumpkin spice in the 60s. But still, 1950, 1960s. So it's not like a 2000s
Right.
thing.
Right. So McCormick, the like spice brand, is
Yeah,
responsible for kind of coining the term.
yeah, that's right.
That's
The
super interesting.
blend itself has been around for a while, but the label goes back to the 50s.
It's so
And
cool.
then as we talked about several times, 2003, the historic year, Starbucks released its now famous pumpkin spice latte.
And people
Drink
really
almost
refer to
didn't
that as when people really started living.
Mhm. The height of humanity, if you will.
Exactly. It's all downhill from there.
The drink almost didn't make it. The
Hmm.
people that were testing it, they didn't think it would catch on, but now it's ridiculously popular. Yeah.
What is this cookery?
It tastes like the cow got into an onion patch.
Reminds me of a pickled egg. That's super interesting, though. I mean,
Yeah, isn't that nuts?
for just like a simple beverage, it has an extremely fascinating story through all the individual parts,
Yeah.
spices that I never would have thought of. So, thanks for thinking about that. I think it was a really just fun little dive into the history of trade and spice. And
Yeah, just that one thing. I just think it just shows, like we talk about in all of our episodes, food and how interconnected the world is. pumpkin spice, like we're making fun of it kind of, but like you could just take that as like a microcosm of human trade,
Yeah.
exploitation, exploration, conquest. I
Yeah.
don't know, it's pretty neat how
And I
it
mean,
ties all these areas, Egypt, Southeast Asia, Europe, the Americas, Latin America. It ties it all together in this is
yeah.
one thing. I don't know. I think it's cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, just this episode, we went from Southeast Asia, Europe, Arab lands, Africa, the Caribbean, South America, like it
Yeah.
covered everything for 2003 for Starbucks to create the pumpkin spice latte.
And then we started living. Pretty
No, I mean, I think that's
yeah.
really cool.
I think
Yeah.
it's interesting, pumpkin spice is kind of this symbol of comfort, seasonal celebration, nostalgia, but looking at the history behind it, right? There's a lot that goes into that history, right? Again, conquest, genocide,
Yeah.
exploration, human trade. Yeah, I don't know, it's pretty neat.
I think it's an appropriate topic for the time that we're currently in, coming up to Halloween, celebrating
October.
spooky season. Now, when you're drinking your pumpkin spice latte or regaling your friends with the history of spices that I'm sure they'd love to hear about, you can think that there is a spooky history to all of these spices, except maybe ginger. Yeah.
Yeah. And it should just make you curious, like what else? What else that we symbolize as like one thing, but its history is the total opposite.
Absolutely. Well, I think that about does it for this episode on pumpkin spice. Thank you all so much for listening. I hope you learned something. Don't forget to follow us on our socials at Farms and Frontlines. Please, if you haven't, follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to your podcasts. Rate us, review us, all that good stuff. And sign up for our newsletter. It's at farmsandfrontlines.substack.com. There will be a link in the episode description as well, so keep an eye out for it there. And if you have any questions, let us know. You can reach us at farmsandfrontlines@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you soon.